Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Other Side of Sales. I'm Ashleigh Early.
I'm Sue Singh.
And today I am so excited because we are joined by Marcus Chan. If you don't know Marcus, you should. But he is the founder of Venli Consulting Group. He helps business-to-business sales professionals sell more and sell better without needing years of experience through his coaching and training programs. Marcus is an executive member of the Forbes Business Council and has been featured on Forbes, Yahoo Finance, MarketWatch, Salesforce, and as a LinkedIn top voice for his results. Marcus, thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, Ashleigh, Sue, I'm excited to be here. I think we're going to have a lot of fun.
Yeah, this is going to be great. So Marcus, we're doing something a little bit different with you because there has been, sadly, a rise in violence against Asian Americans, especially in the US over the past couple months after a lot of hatred, demagoguery in the news and in social media. And so we wanted to replicate something we did last summer in the light of Black Lives Matter. So where we're going to amplify Asian voices, especially Asian American voices. And thank you so much for being our guinea pig. We're going to feature several other people in the coming weeks, but I'd love just to start by kind of giving you the floor to share a little bit about what your experience has been like in sales.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's interesting is, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here to have some real and authentic conversations. And, I've been in sales now, like B2B sales, for over 15 years. And, it's very interesting because I remember, when I first started, and I think even before I got into it, from an Asian background, from parents who are immigrants coming to America, many Asians, usually their parents, they come over here from China, Taiwan, wherever where my parents came from, they usually have an expectation for their kids, okay, which is not to be in sales first off, but to go in to become a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, an accountant. So even me choosing the field of sales to begin with was something, I knew my parents, they weren't too happy about. And what was very interesting though, is even as I remember starting in sales, and I mean, I'm actually stood out just first off. I looked at the team I was on. I was the only person of color on the team, right? Even in the region, I was one of few people of color, and definitely the only Asian. And that was just something I just got used to. Sadly, that was just something I just got used to over time. Now, it was interesting is because of that, you feel, when you stand out that way, when you actually like physically look different, you feel you have to overprove yourself, right? That was really important to me, especially early on. And I struggled at first in sales. I really struggled. I wasn't any good. So it didn't help that I struggled. And I'm like, oh, great. Now I'm standing out. And in Asian culture, you're taught to blend in, especially in America, blend in, don't stand out. So I remember like thinking myself, oh man, I'm already standing out, not in a good way. Like everyone's looking at me, I'm not performing, and I'm sure no one's looking at me, but that's how I felt. So fortunately, I started having success and that was great. As I started progressing up the ladder, I continued to see kind of a common trend, which was there are not really any Asians in sales. Very few, especially male Asians in sales. Now, there were some Asian females that I saw in sales, but there weren't too many. And I thought maybe at first, maybe it was just the company I was with and whatever. But as I started really opening my eyes to across just the other industries, that was a pretty common theme across the board. So for me, just growing up in sales in that environment, I learned, what, if I'm going to do sales, if I'm going to do any role, any sales leadership role or sales role, I'm going to be the best version of me. So this way I can really represent, my people, if you will, in a really, really good light. And on top of that, of course, make my parents proud too, because if we're going to stand out, let's at least make sure we're the best at it, in our position.
So it's interesting you mentioned kind of this evolution from, struggling and feeling like you're standing out while you're struggling to, getting better and accepting kind of the best version of yourself that you can be. It's interesting to me too. In there, you mentioned looking, kind of, you just thought, oh, well, it's just my company. It's just my region. Because as a woman in sales, which is a very different thing, but I went through the same thing. I had that same journey. It was like, oh, I just happened to be on a male dominated team.
Right.
I just happened to be in this thing.
Yep.
It's just this team. It's amazing how easy it is to do that. It's just.
Yes.
And what that journey looks like over a year or 2 years. And then you realize, oh no, this is pretty much par for the course. And it's just when you're not the only.
That's right.
That's the
That's right.
exception.
Oh yeah, and on top of that, what was really interesting too is, as we know, sales is hard. Like to be successful
Yeah.
in B2B sales consistently is really hard. So I remember even as I started progressing up the career and having success, I would when I did see another Asian in sales, male or female, many of them just didn't have success, right? So they would kind of come and go. They'd be at the company for 6 months, 12 months. They wouldn't make it and they'd leave, right? Maybe they go into sales for a while or it's another company and now kind of see the career on LinkedIn. Eventually they end up doing something totally different. And it was always really, really interesting to me, because I believe as well, because many of the ones I saw were, ABA, American born Asians, right? So many of them were probably like, man, my parents wanted me to go into these stereotypical roles. And I went to sales, it didn't work out. So now I better have a plan B and go into something else. So that was something I saw across the board. And it's actually really interesting. And I feel really fortunate that I was able to have success and figure it out. And especially in what I've been doing now, being able to work with all across the world, at least once a week, I'll get a message from, an Asian in sales. And they'll say, wow, Marcus, like, I just find it so great because it's so rare to find someone who is an Asian in sales, who did well in sales, but actually climbed the corporate ladder. And to me, that's like, it feels good, but also it's really sad to hear that too, because I'm like, that's sad to hear that they have no other role models they see. They're not seeing success in Asians in sales. They're not seeing people who are in sales, Asian in sales leadership roles, or if at best they're like middle management, they can't get to the next level or up. That's a scary thing to see. So that's something that's still very prevalent, even as of this record right now. It's still a very common thing we're still facing regardless of the times.
Why do you think that is?
Well, so I think number one, I think most Asians, especially the ABAs, I believe most of them, I don't want to say brainwashed, but many of us are trained to not look at sales as a career. Like that's not real. It's not like, hey, when you grow up, you go to sales. It's not. It's really not. It's like, hey, listen, like you're gonna grow up, you're gonna work really hard, and we want you to get a really prestigious type job. Like you want you to be a doctor. We want you to have a fancy title. And that's really it's about saving face. And I think automatically, just by the way of the culture of growing up that way, you aren't really thinking about sales as a career. You're just not. And then once you are in sales, I think just in general, because it's like a small person, it's like a sales funnel. You have a lot of Asians out there. They start funneling down into a sales career. Very few actually have success because sales is hard. So if they're not properly trained, whatever, they have less. So then as a result of that, if they're not successful in sales, it's hard for them to get promoted to the next level, to actually get into leadership and to get to the next level. And a lot of time with Asian culture, especially Chinese culture, you are taught to listen, not make waves, follow directions, be a good student, be a good son, be a good daughter, follow the rules and not make waves. And that can definitely work, but typically those are the people who are getting promoted. The people who are kind of following the rules, who are kind of quiet, they're not the ones who are getting promoted. I remember literally early on, in B2B sales, and I was having success. I remember my mentor told me, he's like, you need to speak up more. I'm like, well, what do you mean? Like, I mean, we have these meetings. I do speak up. He's like, no. You need to like influence up more. I'm like, well, what do you mean? He's like, you need to, share ideas. You need to bring things to the table. You're doing these things. He's seeing me in the field. You're doing these things that can actually make everyone else better, but you're not bringing these ideas to the table. You're not sharing your opinions. You're not sharing your thoughts. You're just kind of sitting back and allow people have a voice at the table. And that was a really major aha to me, because here I am thinking I'm being a good employee. I'm showing up to work. I'm showing up on time. I'm putting my best foot forward. I'm now getting results, but I wasn't really showing these quote unquote leadership skills.
Yeah.
And that was pretty interesting to me. So at that point, I'm like, okay, you know what? I do need to start doing these type of things. I do need to start to influence them. I do need to share my opinions. I do need to disagree if I don't agree. I don't have to sit back, because before, if someone had an opinion, I disagree with them in a big group setting, I'll just be like, it is what it is. I'm not offended. No big deal. So I had to learn how to stand up for myself, if you will, and put myself out there. And that took a lot of effort to do, because I'm actually naturally introverted. I'm now an ambivert, but I'm naturally introverted. So over time, I worked on building that muscle up to be able to stand up for myself, to push forward. And as a result, it allowed me, people to start seeing me, oh, you know what? This guy has some leadership skills, right? He is standing out. He's not just a salesman, he can lead too. So I believe most Asians, when they are in sales, even if they are having success, they're just showing up and they're doing a good job. They're putting in their work, but they may not necessarily be, showing the quote unquote leadership skills that's, being culturalized as what a good leader is.
Yeah, I was just going to come to that. I was going to say there are a number of good Asian sales leaders, a number of them, right?
Mhm.
But, I think you've been one of the only few who have been seen, right? There are a lot of amazing sales leaders who are not seen. And it's tough because we have to, I'm an Asian myself, and I know how difficult it is to, it feels false when you have to fight your way and show that you have leadership skills. You don't have to prove, but you have to just show. Like, people have to be able to see your leadership skills versus, you being a good leader, actually. And something I've always been, also saying is you have to build a rapport with your leadership, right? It doesn't come naturally to us. Like, even to me and most Asians, it doesn't come naturally to us. Like, even if that's not a qualifier for a good leader. Having a good rapport, showing your leadership skills is not a qualifier for a good leader. And that's what I believe in myself. Yeah. But I do know that to be seen, unfortunately, we have to fight our way up.
So true. I mean, I think you're so spot on, Sue, where it's like, it's uncomfortable to self-promote. It really is for many Asians to self-promote that they have the skills and abilities to do whatever. And I'm a firm believer that for sure definitely impacts it too, because I remember early on, I was not a self-promoter. I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm going to show up, have great results, and I'm going to get promoted because of that. That's not the case at all. Like, you have to like relentlessly self-promote. And that was one thing I learned over time. I remember early on, one of the books I read that really helped me with understanding this was a book called Career Warfare. And that was like an aha to me. I'm like, oh man, like I've been going about this all wrong. Like, just thinking to myself, I'm going to show up, bust my butt, I'm going to get promoted. And that was a really major aha for me. But many people, many Asians especially, they're uncomfortable to self-promote. It's uncomfortable to say, hey, look at me, I am awesome, right? That takes some bravado and leaning out of your comfort zone, quite frankly.
Based on my exposure as an outside member who's not in this community, I see what you're talking about in terms of cultural and the pressures and stuff like that. But I think there's something about being a member of any sort of minority group that is put in a group, put in a situation where you are, that minorityness is emphasized. Yeah. I could think of several other episodes with people of various minority statuses where they express exactly the same thing. It's that kind of the tall flower gets cut, tall daisy gets cut.
Yeah.
Where it's all about like it's and same thing. And especially when you couple that with some imposter syndrome, so then you end up with it feels very disingenuous. I literally, like everyone always, as coach, I tell people to do this all the time. I didn't do this genuinely for myself until about a month ago, creating a brag list of everything I've accomplished in my career. Every time I tried to do it before a month or two ago, it just felt so, I'd write 3 things and be like, I've done nothing with my career, screw this, and walk away. Every single time. I tried like 5 or 6 times at least. And it took someone giving me a different way to think about it, basically saying, don't write it as all the hard stuff that you've done. Or sorry, don't write it as all the good stuff you've done, write it as all the hard stuff you've overcome. Then I can write about that. I can list all the stuff I've done there. But it's interesting, that idea of thinking about how to stand out in the right way and getting comfortable with that. And I'll say that Marcus, I love the idea of an ambivert. I've never heard that term before, but that being able to be, because I've always described myself as an introverted extrovert. Like I'm
same thing, probably
very similar, because I'm somebody who I love getting out in groups and stuff like that, but I tire of it really quickly. Yeah, I love it. I can handle about an hour, 2 hours. It's one of the reasons I tell people, like, I can't handle more than 48 hours in New York City. It just, it drains me so fast.
Or like Las Vegas.
Like, same thing, 48 hours. 48 hours, that is a wall.
I'm gonna go like sleep in like the woods for like a week now. Leave me alone. Nobody talk to me. Like,
humans are gross. Go away. Basically, after about 48 hours of a lot of people. But that introversion was something I had to learn. similarly. So it's kind of an interesting thing because I'm just as happy in a crowded room as I am curled up with a good book and a cocktail in front of a fire. Like those are my two happy places. And I need both. But I'm curious, Marcus, I got to have you address this whole idea of the introvert thing because I hear all the time from hiring managers like, yeah, I want someone who's really comfortable and, a good extrovert. And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Some of the best salespeople I know are natural introverts because there's that reflective quality. There's that deep connection that can be established, whereas extroverts can be a little like me.
Themselves.
Yes.
Yeah, we can be a little much sometimes. So what would you say to a hiring manager who's like, yeah, I don't really know many introverts that are good sales reps?
Well, and I would say for them, like when you think about it, what are truly the great characteristics of the top performing reps? Is it truly because they're loud and rambunctious and outspoken, or is it the ones who have the best listening skills, who can truly listen to a customer or a prospect, who can ask the deep questions to truly understand them? And you could be either one, introvert or extrovert, to do that. But in general, typically, introverts are the ones who usually have the best listening skills. They're the ones who allow their prospect to actually talk. They're the ones, when they ask a closing question, they'll just shut up. Right? While in general, the extroverts are the ones who want to just keep pushing and talking, and they're hoping they're fast talking, and I'm a fast talker, I understand that, but they're fast talking and their speed and their wittiness can overcharm them to close. And yes, maybe, but true deep rooted connections are always going to be the people who can listen the best. And typically, introvert people are better at that in general, of course, generally speaking.
I love that. And I love the emphasis on the listening, because I think that is so spot on. And as somebody who definitely had to learn to shut up during the closing, God, that is an underrated skill. And it's super uncomfortable to do the first few times you do it. If you're somebody who feels like you struggle to get people to talk to you on calls, practice being quiet for 3 seconds before you start talking. You'd be shocked how often your prospect is going to actually start talking instead. It's magical. And Sue, I know you've talked a little bit before about kind of you being a bit of an introvert as well. And I'm curious now too, again, as an outsider looking in, how much of that do you think is just straight personality, and how much of that do you think is tied to your culture and how you were raised?
Well, it's very much tied to the culture where we are raised, right? Again, like Marcus said, we come from very similar cultures. Yeah, talk less, listen more. You listen a lot, whether as a kid or as a woman as well.
Yeah.
Like, especially as a woman, I would say more than a kid. Like we said, like, hey, listen, first listen, then you talk. And so very much a part of our culture, but I think it's all worked out well. Of course, yeah, being introverted, it's really difficult for me, like the first couple of times talking to someone, but then because I tend to listen more, I'm able to connect with them, and I feel like it's always an advantage, because then your customers know, your people know that, hey, they're at least listening to me and they remember. And that's what I find, like a lot about people like me, like introverts, we remember the tiniest details that people have spoken to us before, because we are listening. We're not thinking about the next thing we talk about ourselves.
Marcus, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. What's interesting is I think back to even as a kid, and one of the things I remember, getting trained on by my parents, if you will, is, they say, hey, listen, I remember before I started school, like I remember it was like vividly, like literally kindergarten. Okay. This is like not quite first grade, but right in kindergarten. I remember my parents saying, Marcus, listen, you can go to school. These are the classroom of the kids. You're going to look different. You're going to be different. I also had a speech impediment and didn't start speaking until I was 4. So I had a lot of speaking issues as well. They're like, people are going to look at you funny. They might laugh at you. You will look different. And do not make waves. Don't get in fights. Don't stir things up. Like, just keep under the radar, if you will. Like, just keep out of trouble, keep out of sight, out of mind. Like, don't make waves. Like, do not stand out. That was as a kid, that's what was taught to me. And because that was a thing, because for my parents, when they came to America, especially during the 70s and 80s,
Yeah.
there was a lot of racism still. I mean, there is today still, but at that time, but still a lot of racism as well. So it wasn't like common. People would come and vandalize the restaurant. We parents had a restaurant. They vandalize the restaurant, do weird things. So they're like, hey, don't make waves. Like, just keep under the radar in classes, whatever. Show up, do a good job. Don't make waves. That was ingrained into me as a kid. Like, and it's very interesting to look back and like, that makes a lot of sense, because growing up, I got used to it. I remember my first day of first grade. I literally remember I went there. I was the only Asian kid in class. Okay. There was one black kid. We became best friends. Like, we literally stood out. We're like, all right, like they put us next to each other. That was the weirdest thing. In hindsight, I'm like, well, that's crazy. But like back then, I'm like, man, they literally put the two people of color, the kids, into the same, like literally right next to each other in the back. You don't think much about it in the back. You don't think much about it as a kid. But when you get older, you're like, that's really interesting. Me and Ethan, my best friend, that is so odd. And it was like, don't make waves. Like, just, that was normal, right? That was normal. So, and I remember, my parents, they told me, said, listen, the only time you can stand out is if you are going to show us you are really good at something, but not in a braggadocious way, but you just show them really good. So if you're really good at spelling, you just do a really good job, show them that you're really good at spelling. And
just go win the spelling bee.
Yeah, win the spelling bee, right? Be really good at math, win the math contest, like be really good at those things. And that's really it. But do not brag about if you win. Do not be like, hey, look at me. Yeah. Just don't make waves, keep under the radar, and just do not attract attention. That was how I grew up. That's how I was wired. And that was like in my head for years.
So
it's very similar. Like, even though I'm not in the US and never been there, but we've been brought up on similar things. Like, even, say, we bought something as a kid, like got a new doll. My parents would, before giving it to me, were like, you're not going to brag about it. You're not going to tell anyone, hey, my mom got a new doll. You're not going to do that. And to a kid, and I remember that for everything, you'd be like, no, you can't brag about anything that you do. Like, you don't know if someone else is, how they will feel, right? And so that's something, irrespective of the fact that, I know it's completely different circumstances, but even then, that was something that was taught, like, no, it's completely looked down upon, that you cannot brag or talk about anything that you do or get or do well.
So how do you overcome that when you get to the point where your career, like say you're a rep or you're a leader who has a rep on your team who you think might be battling this? How do you push past it? How do you do this in a genuine way? How do you advocate for yourself in a way that is genuine so you don't miss out on things?
Yeah. What's interesting is I think I feel really, really fortunate. Early on, I started learning to accept praise. That was hard at first, just so you know, like early on, I'm like, someone would praise me. I'm like, what did you say? Like, you just tell me good job. Like, I mean, also in Asian culture, they don't really tell you good job usually, right? It's usually, hey, you got an A? Why didn't you get an A plus, right? That's how they usually is, right? So I wasn't used to praise just growing up. So that was very, very odd. But when I started learning to accept praise a lot more, that was definitely the first piece. But in terms of like, how do you start to, promote yourself, if you will, without coming off as like a look at me, just like a hot shot, whatever, or being that type of person. I think the first thing I understand is understand your intention behind it, and how are you going to showcase and show up. And I think the first thing is, I think you should. I'm a firm believer you should always be humble. So, even as you are acquiring success, awards, or whatever, you really should not be rubbing people's faces. It should not be like, hey, did you see again? I was a rep of the month again, rep of the quarter, rep of whatever. And I had another President's Club, like rub people's faces. Nobody likes that. I think it's important to understand that. But what I believe can be very powerful is if you really think to what are the skills you've developed right there to get you those results? And how can you take those skills and things that you've learned, and how can you help other people? And I believe when you help other people, it helps you showcase that you actually know what you're talking about and help build your brand in a really good way. So one of the things I learned early on, and this helped me in my career and how I got promoted, was when I realized, because I wasn't influencing up enough, I started thinking about, okay, what am I doing specifically that is really going to help? And I remember early on at the first company I was at, I took over a team and I turned them around, and I was first a peer leader. And one of the first things I did was I had basically I'd actually written out a sales playbook. They didn't have a playbook at all. So I wrote a sales playbook, from start to finish, from prospect to close, and how it's all done, scripting, everything else. And my team, my peers on my team were having success with it. And I didn't say, hey, look at me, hey, boss, check us out. I went to my boss, hey, listen, I have an idea. If you are open to it, I know you have these big goals for us to hit this year. I put together a playbook that I've been training my team on. That's how we've been able to have success. Would you like me to help train the other teams? And of course, the boss is like, yes, please. That sounds awesome. So I'm not saying, hey, look at me. I'm saying, hey, how can I help you and serve you, boss? So of course, what happens is when you gather around with the rest of your other peers, and now you are training and showing how you're able to get your results and you're helping other people, they start viewing you as, wow, this person is an expert, or they know what they're talking about. And so it starts raising your equity in the company as well, and how they view you. Then your boss is really good. And then you do it consistently. Okay. And you do it also in ways where you can bring other people up. So one really simple way I did this, it's a little bit of a ninja hack. It's not complex, but I remember even early on, why I changed companies, and I was having some success, and I was, closing a lot of deals, et cetera. And I was really new and no one could figure out what I was doing. So I pulled a couple people on the team into my wing that had been there for a while. And I started helping them and teach them exactly what I was doing. And then when they would text me, whatever, like, oh, Marcus, I did what you said. I just booked 4 more appointments than ever before. I would shoot them a quick email, and I would CC our boss. And I'll be like, hey, Johnny, it's supposed to say, hey, great job, man. That's freaking awesome that you booked 4 more appointments than you ever booked before. Keep it up. I'm so glad, we had talked. Keep it up, man. You're gonna crush the rest of Q1, whatever. Boss sees it now. Johnny's feeling really good now. Johnny's like, wow, thank you so much. I could have done it without your help, blah, blah. Now you're both raising up. So I'm a firm believer, a rising tide lifts all ships.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have that belief, that's a very powerful way to go about it, right? And this is across the board. This is actually why, especially when I was in corporate America, I found many sales professionals, sales leaders would try to keep their secrets under wraps. They were like, ooh, I got all these ideas. I'm like, well, whenever they would ask me, I would just share selflessly. They would say, hey, listen, I heard you have built this program where you are taking reps and turning them to leaders like overnight. Like, I want to do a step-by-step, and I'll get on a call with them and I'll break down step-by-step the playbook. I'll like, do boom, 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 do exactly this order and put your teams through this. And they'd be like, oh my God, I can't believe it. And then they would message me later, and I'll make sure people saw that, right? I wouldn't say, hey, look at me, everyone. I would, email them, and CC their boss. Or if they said, hey, how can I help you? I'll say, you know what? If you don't mind, just email my boss and just say, hey, just tell them how I helped you. That's it. You can CC me or not. I mean, just so they know too. And that was a way to be able to leverage other people to help bring up me as well. And it is uncomfortable at first when you're doing it, but the more you do, the better it's going to be. Because at the end of the day, remember, for your career, the only person that cares about the most is going to be you. Nobody cares as much as you do. So if you are not careful, it will not elevate you. And you have to do it consistently as well. Because when you do consistently as well, what happens, again, your equity goes up. And this is how you get bigger base increases and compound increases as well. Because if you don't, all your boss is going to remember is the last 30 days for your annual review and your comp increase.
One thing I wanted to ask you, Marcus, is, sales is a lot about peer pressure, right? You do need a break. Sales is really tough, right? So you need people, you need friends, right? But being an Asian person, and something that I find myself is being Indian, Asian, okay, and among a group of white men, right? How do you manage those water cooler conversations? Did you even have any? Did you have friends while you were in sales when you started off?
Yeah. So, yeah, it definitely was interesting, right? And I think naturally because I come from like a service background, working my parents' restaurant, serving customers. Then I worked retail. You have this, at least for me, I have this kind of a people pleasing personality. Like I want to make people happy. I didn't want to rock the boat, if you will. So for
Yeah.
me, being able to develop relationships with some of these people wasn't that big of a deal to me. The ones I really didn't like as much were the ones who were more of a bro culture, if you will. I mean, I was really pleasant and really professional with them, but I really didn't enjoy those conversations. Right. And that wasn't my style. So for me, a lot of times, to engage them, it wasn't that big of a deal because whenever I was with them one-on-one, I would really get to know them.
Mm,
If we were driving together to maybe a team training in a different city, like to Seattle, because I'm in Portland,
Mhm.
we'd be in the car, I would just get to know them and their family. Right. So for me, that wasn't really that big of a deal. So that was key. On top of that, I also, to me, it was important to have a community as well. So even on the sales team, I made sure I would text them, hey, how's your day going so far? We kind of, and build that camaraderie. That was really important to me because sales can be really lonely, really lonely.
Yeah.
And I
yeah.
want to have that community. That was really important to me. Now, was everyone bought into me? No, not necessarily, but maybe I just got trained over time. I got so used to just always standing out, being different, looking different. You just kind of find ways to always adapt wherever you're at, whether it was in school, in class, clubs, sporting events, things you did growing up. I'm like, well, I'm just going to go, I'm just going to adapt. I'm used to it. Right. And you end up learning ways to cope, if you will, and to really connect. Right. And it's like humor for me was the easy one, right? I found humor was such an easy one to go into. And when you start using it as a tool to gain trust with other people, right? It becomes like a sales tool, if you will, but you know how to gain trust with other people by just using humor, deprecating humor to just break down the barriers and to get them to like, know, and trust you. So for me, I never really struggled with that. The only
Mhm.
time, this sounds kind of strange, the only time I really struggle with it is if there was anybody who was like the real bro culture where there was like all they want to do is talk about sports. And I grew up not watching sports at all. Like I don't follow any sports, right? Like in college, I watched sports because everyone else did. It was the peer pressure of that. But after that, I stopped watching sports. I don't watch any sports at all. So once they would have started talking about, the game on Saturday, I'm like, what game? I felt like I was like Zoolander. I'm like, so who won the match, Pops? Like that's how I felt. I'm like, I didn't know what was going on. And they're like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't know. Like, can we talk about something else now? But those are ones I always struggle with. But at the end of the day, I found whoever's going to be, I'll just do my best to just show up, be friendly with them, and never take things really personally, because you just learn to just accept it as it is.
Marcus, this has been a blast. And I feel like we could go on for a while, but it's time for us to switch gears slightly and do the lightning round. So
All
this
right.
is the way we end
Mm.
all of our episodes. This is designed to be a series of lighthearted questions. Don't think too much about them. Just gonna have some fun. We'll start with the classic. What's your morning routine?
Oh man, are you sure you want to know this? Okay. All right.
Oh yeah.
All right. Okay. Here's what I am one of those morning routine guys. So do not judge me, but this is how my morning routine usually goes. So I wake up at 5:15 a.m. I get out of bed. I go and brush my teeth immediately. Right after that, I go and I do a power 30-minute workout. It's 360 to 400 repetitions of a specific targeted muscle group. Okay, along with abs. Once that is done, I go downstairs to my home office here. I will actually do Wim Hof breathing exercises for 3 minutes. After the exercises, I then go and I write out physically my 1, 3, and 5 year goals. I write them all out. After I write them all out, I go through a series of affirmations for 3 minutes. After all the affirmations, I then go and I will visualize. So I actually will visualize what I call my perfect day. So what I have written out is 1 year from today, if I achieve all my goals for the year, what would my perfect day look like a year from today? So what I've actually done is I've taken that, I've written it all out from wake up to the day ends, how I feel, what happens, etc. I've actually taken that, I've recorded a narrative of me telling that story. It's on my phone. So then I actually listen to myself. I narrate the story from start of it. And I visualize exactly what happens a year from today. Then after that, I visualize my upcoming day and exactly how I expect it to go. And then after that, I wrap that part up, and then I go and I actually will post on social media, do all my social media posts. But then right after I post, I actually will go spend, I'll spend about 30 minutes doing engaging, but I'm actually walking on the treadmill with a weight vest. So I'll walk at 3.5 miles per hour at a 4-inch incline while getting about 5,000 to 7,000 steps over the next 30 minutes. We're in a, right now, I just got a new weight vest, but normally it's a 16-pound weight vest. So I put on a 24-pound weight vest now for the next 30 minutes. And then that's my pretty much morning routine. I go shower real quick, change, get my kiddo up from there. I get him ready. Once he's ready, nanny comes, do the handoff, and I'm off to work. That's it. That's my morning routine. That's all it is.
No big deal.
It's not a big deal.
Right. Pick one person who's had a significant impact on your career.
Yeah, so I'll definitely say my dad. I mean, maybe it's cliche, but my dad's been, he's had a major impact on my career. And I think back to all the lessons I've learned as a kid that really have helped me all across the board, right? So from, just seeing him show up and persist regardless of whatever happened, knowing his story, how he immigrated to America with absolutely nothing, escaping communist education camps, that inspires me, to how he treated people. And I think about all these things, these micro lessons you learn growing up as a kid you don't realize. And I've been able to apply it to my career. So I think to my career, I know if it wasn't for my dad, there's no way I would achieve the success I've had if it wasn't for him.
Love that. All right. What's your pump up song?
All right. So it's funny. So I used to have a lot of different pump up songs, right? I mean, it's cheesy, but all I do is win. Yeah, it's definitely a popular one, right? It gets me fired up. But I tell you what, I've learned now how to pump myself up without music. So music can be great, but even that morning routine, boom, I do that routine. I'm ready to rock. I'm fired up without coffee.
What's the one thing you'd wish you'd learned earlier?
Yeah. So one thing I wish I learned a lot early on is only take advice from those who've already achieved what you want to achieve consistently. I have found across the board, people love to give it advice. It's like about everything, life, relationships, sales, whatever. But very few people actually follow their own advice, and very few people are able to achieve success consistently. So I find those who are able to win consistently. So say, for example, if I want to learn from someone who's going to be great at sales, I want to learn from someone who is winning the top award, hitting President's Club every single year, regardless. Not that person who is a one-hit wonder. Not that person that had one bang out year because one deal fell in their lap. I want to hear from the winners who are winning every single time. And that's for any industry or field. If I want to get marriage advice, I want to hear from the person who's been married for 50 years and they're happily married. Not that person who's had multiple divorces. Sorry, but that's just reality.
I love that. This one's going to be fun considering the library you've got behind you. What's your favorite sales book? Okay.
So I got to think about this for a sales book specifically, because I really, I don't read that many sales books anymore. But if I think back to the one that's probably had the most impact, specifically sales, I would say probably Brian Tracy, The Psychology of Selling. Yeah. Just the classic fundamentals in there. Because it's more than just sales. It's really about being a great human being. It's a combination of all the above.
Nice. What's one way someone could have been a better ally to you?
I think one way is, because sometimes, especially I would say, growing up or in corporate America, people would make a joke or say something that's clearly it is racist. It's essentially racist. I mean, lack of a better term. It's basically racist. And when you're the only Asian and it's being said to you, you feel really uncomfortable standing up for yourself. You're kind of like, oh, okay, like, all right, like you just accept it, right? And sometimes it may not seem like a big deal, whatever, but it can be hurtful though, right? It can be hurtful, like even when someone says, oh, wow, man, you're like, I don't, I don't see many Asians in sales. So you're pretty good at sales for being Asian. Like, what is that supposed to mean? Like, what is that supposed to mean? Like, so that's that type of stuff. It may seem so like small and little, but it's very uncomfortable to receive. So for other people that are around that, I wish they would, like stood up when you see somebody stand up for that person, right? Because again, instinctually, I want to be like, okay, I'm just gonna make a joke now to diffuse a situation and just move on, right? So that's where I wish the allies was done. So now I have more courage than before because I'm older. I've learned a lot. So when I see something now, I can stop it and stop for other people. But early on, I really wish someone could stop for me.
Yeah.
What's one way you're working to be a better ally for others?
So I'll say literally that. So I think for sure, yes, we can post stuff and do kind of, the social thing, people see that type of stuff. I think the most important thing is really through our actions, right? If you are seeing something, doing something about it. Okay. And I think that's so vital. I can definitely check and do all things. But I think for me, the best thing I can do is if I see anything happen, I have to stop it. I have to stop it. Whether if it's in the street, if it's online, I have to stop it because I just like I said, I remember being me and not being able to stand up for myself because I felt like I was like vulnerable. That's scary. It's really scary.
Yeah. Right. What's your guilty pleasure after a bad day?
Oh man. Okay. So please don't judge me. It is what it is. So let's take a look. So after a bad day, I love a good cheat meal. I usually only have one, but sometimes if you have a bad day, you might have to have a cheat meal. So I definitely love all carby things. So my go-to is definitely a large whole pizza and probably like 4 cinnamon rolls, or like a bunch of carrot cake. So like we had our cheat meal this past week, so it wasn't anything crazy. It was just like I had like some awesome Korean food, a lot of extra carbs, and then I crushed. I made a bunch of like sandwich, ice cream sandwich cookies. So it was delicious. It was delicious.
I love it.
Delicious.
Oh, so good. I love those sandwich cookies that are like, you can get those like chocolate chip cookies with the ice cream in the middle.
We just made our own, right? We got a bunch of cookies, right? And we just made our own, right? So
Chips Ahoy! Psh, done.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I love that. All right, Marcus, this has been a blast. How can people find you?
So super easy. You can find me right on LinkedIn. If you look up Marcus Sham, the only guy with Speedos in the tagline, because I sold Speedos at one point. So LinkedIn's probably the easiest and best place to find me.
I love it. All right. Well, if you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, tell some friends. Please go find Marcus. His content really is fantastic. Cannot speak highly enough of that. And please don't forget to engage with us, like, subscribe, OSOS_pod on Twitter, Other Side of Sales on LinkedIn, and Other Side Sales on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of The Other Side of Sales, and we will see you next time.